The Catred.org podcast, your weekly guide to the world of esports news. Presented by Richard Lewis.
Yes, welcome to another Catred.org podcast, and if I sound flatter than a Welsh miner at the moment, I'll explain why. During the course of the podcast, we've been fairly open and honest. We've told you when we're recording, what order we're recording in, when guests have dropped out, when we've had to scramble at the last minute to get replacements. All things told, it's been pretty open from the start. So in the spirit of that openness and honesty, I've got to say that the response to the podcast has been mostly disappointing. The plan from the start had always been to do a run of 10 podcasts and to see whether there was a trend in the number of people listening to it and how much attention it brought, and so far that trend's pretty much pointed to a steady decline. The elephants among you will of course remember back to 2006-2007 when myself and a colleague used to do a radio show called Friday Night In. That's often mentioned, and the podcast kind of has superseded that. I've looked to compare the podcast to those shows, which we used to put out after our live recording as a podcast. Back then, we would regularly go past 1,000 live listeners. We used to have so many people. One time, it even shut the server down, and we'd also get lots of downloads afterwards. And all told, you'd probably have about 3,000 people having heard our show, and perhaps more, perhaps less. Who really knows? The downloads that we've had for this podcast have been mostly disappointing. We've never really gone past 1,000, and it seems to be on some downward trajectory, no matter who we have on the show. For example, last week we managed to rustle up probably the best all-rounder in North America, the manager of the best team, or the most successful team in North America. We also had a top Danish player on to give a breakdown of a Danish LAN that had just occurred. We did a roundup of news, we did all of this, we did all of that, and it was pretty much for 400 downloads, which, all things said, it's just very disappointing. And I appreciate that we've got, regular listeners that are all very positive, and, we've got people who like to retweet the podcast and try and spread it around, but ultimately, for that sort of outlay, the work that goes into it, it's not really worth it. So, although we're only at the halfway point, I've got to say already my gut feeling is to put the kibosh on the whole thing and just to kind of maybe make the next week's podcast the final one. Obviously, if you don't want that to happen, that's entirely up to you. It's not really an open plea, because believe me, if you think I enjoy being sat down in my bedroom cum recording studio on a weekend when I can be out drinking beers in this glorious Indian summer that we're enjoying right now, you've got another thing coming. Certainly the idea of people listening to my voice and my views on esports doesn't really excite me that much that I'd like to sacrifice drinking time. Ultimately, whether the podcast survives or not, it's no skin off my nose. I think we can all be relatively proud of the content we've put out. I think it's got better each week. And I also think that, in terms of the other esports-related podcasts I listen to, what few there are and what few radio shows there are, I think it stands out as pretty much the strongest. It definitely has a heavy CSS bias, and, we all know why that is, because that's primarily the bread and butter of the website. But ultimately, I think the final product is something that we can all be proud of, and it stands up pretty well. However, obviously, this is a numbers game, and if we aren't getting the numbers, then we're better off putting our effort elsewhere. And we are working on some other projects in the background. I can't tell you about too much yet, so it's not as if the time couldn't be better spent if this isn't the kind of thing you enjoy. So, without belabouring the point, if you enjoy the podcast, support it. If you don't. It's that simple. The ball is very much in your court. So, before I feel the need to descend into floods of crocodile tears like day 9, I may as well tell you what we've got on this week's podcast. Coming up on the show, we'll have the chaps from Corsair who are organising the $10,000 Corsair Cup for Call of Duty 4. We're going to talk to them a little bit about that. We're going to talk to them about maybe if they have any plans to stay involved in esports. We'll probably talk to them a little bit about their peripheral range as well, because I imagine they might want to plug that. And as promised, we're going to have a look at esports top 5 bullshit artists. That's right, the people that I think have told the biggest whoppers in the esports scene, or certainly the most amusing ones to date. No doubt as well, we'll have some CSS players from both or one side of the Atlantic dropping in, because we're getting a little bit closer to the top 10 for both North America and Europe being put out on the website, so we'll certainly be looking to pick someone's brains about that. At this stage, it could be anybody. But as per usual, we'll start off with a look at the week in esports in Newswatch.
Counter-Strike Source.
Most of the CSS news this week comes from across the water, where the CSS scene has had an agonising reappraisal following the ESEA LAN finals. The first thing to occur was that Czech 6 decided to remove their Counter-Strike Source team and look for a better representative, if you like, after a fairly disappointing ESEA LAN finals for them. The team itself wasn't actually a team at that point anyway, having had internal problems that seemed to be revolving around their possible attendance at ESWC under the CyberRev tag. It pretty much showed. Their performance was lackluster. They only really managed to record a win against Team Forbidden, who themselves had a pretty disastrous outing for their first LAN together. Well, certainly compared to their online performance, but we'll come to that in a moment. And the only one who really stood out was, of course, Colo, their incredible AWPing talent. In reality, there was probably as little the team could have done to stop this move by the organisation, because it was obvious that they were eyeing up a bigger talent, namely Fully Talked, who'd beaten Team Dynamic in the finals. It's not quite clear what this mix of Canadian and US players are going to do. The rumour is that they're not sticking together, but we'll wait and see how it turns out in the next few days. The big talking point in North American CSS wasn't the fact that Team Dynamic had been dethroned, or the fact that Fully Talked were going to be able to go to ESWC thanks to Czech 6, and again we'll come to that in a moment. The talking point was about Team Forbidden being forbidden from the ESEA LAN after legally drinking in somebody else's hotel room. Yes, in an abuse of power more traumatic than the time my doctor gave me a prostate exam when I went in with the flu, it seems that LP Kane and the rest of the ESEA admins have gone absolutely power nuts and decided to ban Team Forbidden because they don't want to be associated with underage drinking. The one problem with that being the fact that none of the people that were caught drinking in Team Forbidden were actually underage. Quite the opposite, in fact. The people being filmed drinking in Team Forbidden were all 21 or over, and it was the people from Czech 6 Gaming who had provided the alcohol that were actually underage. Of course, Czech 6 to date have received no punishment whatsoever, despite ESEA's supposed zero-tolerance standpoint. Not only that, but in the video that caused all the problems, there was actually an ESEA staff member drinking along with the people, both underage and overage. After the video of this session was uploaded to YouTube, LP Kane responded by giving Team Forbidden exactly 1 hour to remove the video, but of course this was done in the small hours, and the person who had access to the YouTube channel, a personal YouTube channel and in no way a team YouTube channel, was actually sleeping, as most people were. Unable to remove the offending video, they woke up to find that they'd been banned for an entire year. After chaos descended onto the ESEA forums and several heartfelt pleas were made on behalf of Team Forbidden and by Team Forbidden, the compromise to ban the team for 150 days was made. The trouble with this being that 150 days meant they wouldn't be able to compete in the next invite season, and because of that they'd lose their place and have to go all the way back to main and work their way up again. Let's not forget that Team Forbidden had already once done the impossible. They came straight from main, and in their first season in Invite they made it to the LAN finals, where they finished 4th and were reasonably disappointing if all truth be told. The chances of Team Forbidden doing it again are very slim, and already the players are maybe thinking about collectively retiring or just playing for fun and not taking it serious anymore, because they can't believe that for doing nothing wrong whatsoever they've been banned for 150 days. LP Kane, in his infinite wisdom, decided to uphold the ban, but also to ban a few people who were speaking out in defence of them, if only for a few days. He was also accepting subscription cancellations for people who felt particularly strongly about what looks on the surface of it an abuse of power. To summarise, Team Forbidden have been banned for legally drinking in somebody else's hotel room. They've received little sympathy, unsurprisingly, from the teams they beat in the regular season, especially those who are now convinced that they somehow managed to cheat and bypass the ESEA anti-cheat in the client. Yet, sympathy or no sympathy, the decision does reflect dreadfully upon the league, and we can only hope that it will be rescinded at a later date. That's extremely unlikely, and Team Forbidden have found that any debate, any discussion, any attempt to present their side of the story has been deleted and stifled, and with ESEA having a bit of a monopoly on the news in the North American scene now, that's particularly a bad thing for them. So far, despite support from the cadred.org community, it hasn't really worked out for them, and it looks like they'll be playing in Maine next season.
You probably heard we ain't in the prisoner-taking business. We in the killing Nazi business. And cousin, businesses are booming.
Following their success in the ESEA final, Fully Talked Netcode Illuminati decided that ahead of ESWC they would need to make a roster change. Unable to play in the ESEA finals, Marlin Tai had to drop out and was replaced by Neil Monty Montgomery, also known as just Neil, and he went on to have a hell of a tournament, being shortlisted for the MVP award. This meant that he was brought into the team on a full-time basis, and Josh Steele-Nissan said the following to cadred.org about the move. He said, "We were considering bringing in a fresh face for our team for a few weeks now in preparation for ESWC. Our main options were to be Neil Monty Montgomery, Ryan Romba, and Marlin Tai. Basically, Marlin was on the roster the entire time, and he was our full-time starter, but he has been inactive lately for the duration of the ESEA season following the conclusion of CVOP's 12. In order to be in prime condition for ESWC, we would need to have a full squad of dedicated players putting in the time to have every strat down to a T. I think that once we have got him into a bunch of scrims with Dazed calling instead of me, we should have a strong system working for us. I was calling the past few weeks of ESEA's regular season plus the LAN finals, and as much as my calling is similar to Dazed, we still tend to do a few things differently. Once we get through the adjustment period, I think we can have a really strong team, even more so than very games, as we will have no weak links. I have full confidence in every player on the roster to be able to make big plays, clutches, solo sites, as well as implementing teamwork into their gameplay to make us not the only number one team in North America, but also the number one team worldwide." Needless to say, the focus following on from that quote was that he seemed to think that Very Games had some weak links, something he later recanted and said what he meant was they had no weak links, same as we don't now. Obviously, the team are very confident ahead of ESWC, especially following their 4-map demolition job of Team Dynamic, a side that was supposedly untouchable in the North American scene. Whether that victory means they can go around comparing themselves to Very Games is another matter entirely, and we'll have to wait until ESWC comes rolling around before we see whether that comparison was just, or whether it was just a deranged flight of fancy. And at the end of the great North American saga, out came the inevitable news that Czech 6 were indeed picking up Fully Talked. It was a great move for both parties. The team was still looking to fund ESWC and needed support, and in truth, they still needed support even with this move to Czech 6 Gaming, and Czech 6 needed a team that was going to put them back to the top of the North American scene. Mutually beneficial arrangement then. About the move, Ben the Wiz Scholes said, while Czech 6 is still determining their intentions for picking up a team for ESEA Season 10, we are excited to fully support Fully Talked at ESWC in 2011. We hope that this step will help show Czech 6's enthusiasm and community presence by expanding the North American CSS scene with this event. After coming off of an impressive first-place victory over Dynamic at Season 9, we are confident that Fully Talked has all the tools to compete with anyone they'll face in Paris. Czech 6 wishes them, as well as all the other teams, good luck and safe travels in October. Trey TCK Martin also added, just for cadred.org, we're all extremely excited to be able to compete with the best teams around the world, and a game we've all played for years and are very passionate about. We feel really confident going into this event and are expecting nothing less than top 2. We want to say thanks to Czech 6 for helping us out and the donations we have received thus far. Good luck to all teams attending. So, while they're wishing good luck to all the teams attending, I think it's fair to say that given they've set themselves a target of top 2 minimum, they actually don't want them to have any luck at all. In fact, I imagine quite the opposite. They probably prefer all the teams to have bouts of explosive diarrhea and temporary blindness brought on by the sun. Whether or not we'll see a Stevie Wonder shitting fest is yet to be determined, but what we will see is probably the best team on current form, at least in North America, up against the biggest in Europe at ESWC. Very exciting indeed. With all of that going on, you could be forgiven for overlooking the announcement that NAPTA Factory have gone official. Yes, it's just not that exciting, and of course the Danish scene is as hard to keep up with as it is talented. The mixed team that punched above its weight at the One Night in Copenhagen LAN last weekend that we nicely summarised on the previous podcast that none of you bastards downloaded have decided that they're going to make a good fist of it. There's nothing like a podium finish to give you delusions of grandeur, and the team now think they can rub shoulders with the best in Europe and certainly domestically. A team statement on the NAPTA Factory website said, "Today we officially declare ourselves a team. We have been playing together for a while now, and due to the chemistry socially and in-game, along with the result at Onic, we would like to go all in with this team and start outing some time and effort into this project. Our ambition is to become a top 3 team in Denmark. Later on, we would like to mark us as a top 10 team in EU, meaning Europe." They have got some good players, not least of all Christopher Gravity Soholm, who people will remember from the Imperial, but whether or not they can be the top 3 in Denmark, which is for my money the strongest scene in Europe right now outside of France, that's another matter entirely. I won't be holding my breath for them to break into the top 10 in Europe anytime soon, but it's good to see another Danish team that'll make things reasonably competitive domestically.
Counter-Strike 1.6.
In 1.6 news, there was a bit of drama when it turned out that some 1.6 players, reasonably known, got banned by ESL Wire. The first victim of fall foul to ESL Wire was Cosmo, the former AAA, that's Against All Authority player from France, and he said it was all a big misunderstanding because he'd been watching through a demo with a wall hack enabled in order to see if there was any foul play from somebody else, a team named Underdogs, but when he loaded up the Versus system to play a friendly gather, he just forgot to turn off the wall hack. Not gonna lie, that's exactly how I got that banned as well. Next up was less of a surprise. It was Zyder, the Danish player, who had actually just been banned from X-Plane and all of their leagues, and consequentially all the LANs in Denmark for one whole year. He said he'd only used a silent defuse script, but then he was recently caught on easy anti-cheat with a GUI that relates to a private cheat. So, while he protests his innocence as well, the evidence is pretty damning. Finally, to make it a trinity of known players, it was the Polish player Snacks who occasionally murks with frag executors. As always happens when a Polish player's banned, every player in Poland came onto the forums to say he hadn't done it, and what proof did the ESL have anyway? Of course, ESL can't release anything because that would give cheaters a significant advantage in how it will avoid detection. Snacks naturally says he's innocent. Either way, they've all been served with 24-month bans for cheating infractions, along with over 400 other players. That shows that maybe, just maybe, ESL Wire's actually doing its job.
So long, losers!
There was a bit of bad but expected news for Na'Vi, with the announcement that their wealthy benefactor, known as Arbalest, had finally pulled out of his commitment to the 1.6 team. He'd been involved with the team since 2009, giving funding for salaries, incremental costs, and even rented an apartment for the team to train and boot camp in. A solemn statement on the Na'Vi website said, "We all remember that Na'Vi's creation was possible due to the support and funding of Arbalest. Together we had a long run and successful journey, and were able to win 4 World Championships, World Cyber Games, Electronic Sports World Cup, and Intel Extreme Masters Seasons 4 and 5. His light philosophy and priceless experience helped us a lot on our way to the Olympia. In October 2011, our agreement with Murat runs out, and further development of Na'Vi will be done by our own costs. We want to thank Arbalest for his immense contribution to our team and esports on the whole. Arbalest Cup Series tournaments prove that CIS teams are able to compete and beat recognised esports stars, as well as gave that valuable experience which helped Ukraine to become one of the strongest esports nations in the world. Arbalest will be still our good friend and our most loyal fan. That is why we'll do our best to please all our followers with the outstanding sports results and new achievements. They definitely owe him a huge debt of gratitude, but recently the team has gone off the boil. They're not the force that they once were, and in fact, they're actually not even the best team in the Ukraine if recent results are to be believed. It's highly unlikely that they'll ever have the same kind of support that they had with him from any head sponsor, and they are currently on the search. Although they are sponsored by several big names, it's clear that they don't receive the same level of support because at the end of the day, who would be willing to give it? Whoever does come in will have some pretty big shoes to fill, and it's unlikely they'll ever be the same team as they were with that much support from the Kazakhstani mogul. His withdrawal of support for Na'Vi represents the end of his involvement with esports as a whole, and while people might lament his passing, it was always going to happen, because after all, he was pouring money into a bottomless pit. He'll be remembered for many things. In the Ukraine, he'll be remembered for being the silent partner behind Na'Vi's success.
Heroes of New Earth.
A meagre piece of Heroes of New Earth news, and it's roster news relating to Infused Thermaltake's team. Following the announcement that Vanyo Pillows-chan, the supporting player in the team, would be leaving, Infused Thermaltake were left with something of a gap ahead of DreamHack Winter and a few other events as well. Setting themselves up for something of a logistical and budgetary nightmare, Infused Thermaltake decided to look across the water to fill that gap. Obviously, I do appreciate that the UK is an island and therefore looking across the water could be in pretty much any direction, but I am referring to the Atlantic Ocean. So they announced the addition of Peter Pandem Dager to the team, who will slot straight in as a direct replacement for Pillows. The decision has been met with a mixed reaction from the Heroes of New Earth community, and certainly it's going to prove to be expensive for Infused. Whether or not that outlay is going to be worth it, we'll know after DreamHack. The other development in Heroes of New Earth was the arrival of patch 220, which did bring in quite a lot of changes, perhaps too many to talk about in the space of this podcast. With Dota 2 looming on the horizon, just in case you haven't heard about that already, S2 Games have looked to balance Heroes of New Earth and make it a much more cohesive, competitive experience. Melee heroes now enjoy a quicker rate of base health regeneration from 0.25 to 1.25, which makes the melee classes a little bit more favoured. There's also been improvements and tweaks made to pretty much every hero in the game. Although the patch has taken a while to implement, it's been received pretty well by the competitive community, who have heralded it as a step in the right direction. If you want to find out more about the patch and the specifics for maybe the heroes you play or whatever, head over to the Heroes of New Earth forums and look for the patch 220 notes.
Call of Duty.
There was a bit of Call of Duty for roster news this week, not least of all Skin joining IMEX. It was a bit of a big story. You've got the former TCM Gaming SMG joining an all-Croatian team apart from him. The player, who made a name for himself with the Italian Ox Enemax, then went on to join TCM Gaming, who won I-43, but the guy just can't get a break, and the team decided to go their separate ways after a LAN victory. In a statement to our sister website, tech9.org, Michelli Skin Mancini said, "After breaking with the TCM Gaming, I was looking for a solid and stable team that would welcome me. After several attempts, I came to the conclusion that the IMEX was what I was looking for, so I thank the organisation, and I hope to do my job well to lead this team to the high ranks of COD 4. Ignoring the fact I deserve a lot of credit for not reading that in a Mario stroke Luigi accent, it's a great place for the player to be to achieve those goals, but it's an even better pickup for the team, who desperately needed an SMG player to fill Valkyrie's shoes, who wasn't really doing so well. The team are headed in the right direction, having won the most recent Team Dignitas Alienware Cup and are currently in the lead of the Cybergamer League with 3 wins against Empathy, AT Gaming and Team Visualize, who were the Fragomatic champions. The other bit of COD 4 roster news was relating to some Russians, and that was Team Element had become Team Prior. After returning from the QWERTY LAN COD 4 Masters, Team Element decided to move homes, and they decided to, of course, go to Team Prior. It's something of a reversal of fortunes because the team had struggled to find support elsewhere, which is why they moved to Team Element in the first place, a traditionally British organisation. Quite what's so different about what Team Prior have put on the table, I'm not quite sure, but evidently it is a better deal, and the team look very happy with it. They're currently competing in the Cybergamer League, where they currently stand with 2 wins, which were against the Link Gaming side and against Knights with a capital S, although they did record a loss against Visualize. The team will next be competing at LAN at the Helsinki COD Challenge number 2, which is set to feature a lot of Russian opposition, so keep your eyes out for that one. And there was much rejoicing when Quad V announced their return to the Call of Duty 4 scene, with the legendary shoutcasters Tosspot and D-Man providing their insight for the upcoming Corsair Vengeance Challenge, which of course you'll hear more about in just a moment. Every Thursday, the shoutcasters will be commentating on the hottest games they can find from the Vengeance Call of Duty 4 Cup, with of course a $10,000 prize pool. And they've got a new addition as well, in the form of Dennis Menace Fick. For many years, Quad V was considered the benchmark of shoutcasting, so naturally Dennis was overawed at joining them. He said Quad V, like for most other people, was the only name in commentating I could care about. Listening to all my favourite commentators bringing me all the COD 4 action my eyes and ears could desire, it was always a dream to be part of them, and it seems that dream has actually come true. I would just like to thank everyone for their continued support in the COD 4 EU community, Stuart and everyone else behind Quad V for making this opportunity possible. And of course, Stuart Tosspot Saw, who's never shy, he said to Tech9, "We're glad to be back in the saddle casting COD 4 once again. The CVC tournament looks like it's going to be an absolute belter, and hats off to those involved in getting such a great prize for the tournament. For D-Man and myself, this is a great chance to get back casting one of the games we both enjoy casting the most, and one of the communities we've got the greatest affinity to. Our intention is to make Thursday nights a mainstay for everyone during this tournament, so people know where to be and what to watch every Thursday night. I'm also glad to welcome Menace into Quad V. He's an excellent caster that I've been following for a while, and to have him on board for this tournament and for future COD events is fantastic. We're looking forward to supporting him and helping him grow as a caster." Many out there think Quad V have left it too late to launch a serious comeback attempt, but they have got talent on their books, D-Man in particular, a favourite of mine, and with this new acquisition of Menace, it could be a good thing. Certainly, it's great that a tournament of this stature is going to have some recognised commentators providing their insight and entertainment over the course of the Cup.
The interviews.
For the interview this week, we've got Ruben Mukherjee from Corsair. You're probably thinking, who the bloody hell's he, Richard? You've only gone and picked up another boring interview subject, but not at all. Ruben's been involved in esports for some time. Way back in the late 90s, he was instrumental in setting up Razer. He's also worked for Logitech, and now he's at Corsair, helping them with their Vengeance range. There he's overseen the development of the Vengeance range, which is mainly made for esports. They're great gaming peripherals in general, but they're very esports focused. They've got mice with sniper buttons, they've got keyboards that are designed for no ghosting and special raised keys so you can find them easier. All things told, he's doing a great job, and I can say that firsthand because I had the pleasure of being invited to the Vengeance gaming peripheral launch where I tried out all of their equipment, and I gotta say I was very impressed indeed. His involvement in esports doesn't just end there, though. He was instrumental in getting the Corsair Vengeance $10,000 Call of Duty 4 Cup arranged with, of course, Esports Heaven. And it's these things and more that we're going to be talking to him about in this interview that we recorded earlier today. Okay, so representing Corsair is Mr. Ruben Mukherjee. Want to say thanks very much for coming on the show, first of all. And for people who maybe don't know about you or didn't read my article where I did tell them a little bit about you, could you maybe fill in the broad strokes and talk about your involvement in both gaming and esports?
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for having me on your podcast, Richard.
Anytime, brother. It's all good.
So hopefully, as you can still tell from my accent, I am from the UK, but I've been living in California for 8 years now. I was with Logitech for the last few years, and I was director of product marketing, and I headed up development on a lot of the G Series peripherals, including the G Series keyboards. A great, talented team at Logitech. And I joined Corsair 18 months ago to head up their non-memory business, which we call components, and very pleased to be given a relatively free hand to go off and design the sort of mice and keyboards that I always wanted to use myself, and pleased to be launching the Vengeance line.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about the Vengeance line. I mean, I came down to the kind of launch, and thanks very much, of course, for extending the invitation. I had a great day.
Thanks for coming.
No, it was. I felt a little bit out of sorts. It was a little bit kind of posher than most of the technology dues I've been to. It's rare you have to go through a metal detector on the way in. It's usually on the way out to make sure you haven't stolen anything. So that was cool. But yeah, I was really impressed with the range. To be honest, and I've had a lot of people say to me, they've been asking me on Steam, are you just saying that? Are you just saying that? Are you just saying that 'cause you have to? But no, I really was. And in particular, I think the keyboard, and I love the old HS1 headset when I had the pleasure to do a review of that. But for a long while, I think there's been peripherals that kind of pose as being esports focused. But with your range, I did get the sense that you guys had put a lot of work and a lot of thought into it in terms of what esports competitors would need. So I guess the first question is, I mean, what kind of work went into it, and how do you feel about the kind of finished product now that it's here?
Yeah, so esports is very much where it's at, and it was the esports player that we were targeting. It's great that we've, one end of the spectrum, we've got pro gamers and, even a few celebrities like Jonathan Wendell. But down at grassroots level, it's just normal people like you and me who, get together with our friends of an evening and play online. So, I mean, I just love the way that gaming's been sort of democratized like that. As I was saying to you earlier, with sites like Cadrid, I mean, I'm just really impressed by the sort of turnout you're getting on a regular basis for your competitions. It's great stuff.
And for the products, can you talk a little bit about kind of what was the ultimate goals? I mean, again, it might seem a bit of an obvious question, but if you can talk a little bit about what kind of you wanted to create.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been sort of involved in mice and keyboards, as you mentioned, for quite a few years. In fact, my first involvement with dedicated gaming mice was back in '98 with my good friend Robert Krakoff, Razer guy. I was involved in launching the Razer brand in Europe back then, and went to a lot of LAN tournaments, spent a lot of time with players, which is an experience that I've had the luxury of making use of through the last sort of 12, 14 years or so. And as with a lot of innovation, a lot of it comes from, just watching and playing and listening to what people are doing. You don't get great results from focus groups and things like that. Yeah. So there's a lot of gamers within the Corsair team. Corsair's been making overclockable memory for sort of gamers and PC builders since 1994. So there's a pretty strong heritage of gaming and esports in the company. So fortunately, I've got a very talented pool of gamers to call on for advice. But as we looked at these mice and keyboards, we started off with a ground-up design. It's the easiest thing in the world. I mean, Richard, you and I could form a company tomorrow, go off and source some products in the Far East and call them gaming. Yeah. But none of us would have been happy with that. And, as is the Corsair way, we started with a blank whiteboard and sketched out the sort of things we wanted and spent a year and a half building them. And the result is the Vengeance series of mice and keyboards. I mean, one of the things that we really wanted was the sort of robustness and reliability, so that if you do you do get in a temper and throw your mouse across the room, it's still going to be playable. That we want them to sort of age and wear, like any sort of well-loved tool, and sort of get better as they get older rather than get worn out. So we deliberately went for, I mean, it's just these tiny details. Like, you know, in the mice, we went for these Omicron switches, which they're rated to some sort of ridiculous number of million actuations. I mean, it's totally over the top, but it just means that in the typical life of a mouse, it's going to perform as accurately and smoothly, you know, in 5 years' time as it does when it's new out of the box. With the keyboards as well, we spent a lot of time dissecting exactly what we wanted in a keyboard. I've worked on other keyboard projects before where we've tried to get as close to the sort of feel of a mechanical switch as we could. So this time we actually went and worked with Cherry on acquiring the mythical Cherry Red switches. They have a very light feel, and they do take a bit of getting used to. But it doesn't take long, and once you do settle into it, you suddenly find that, you know, double tapping and sort of rolling over between movements suddenly becomes much more natural. I mean, when you go from that to a normal silicon dome keyboard, it feels actually pretty mushy in comparison.
Well, one of the things I noticed when I was listening to the presentation and was there with the assembled press kind of guys, and, you know, the ones who weren't taking photographs of stuff that we already had photographs provided of. But, you know, one of the things I did notice, and I hate to kind of drop this on you, there were a few kind of subtle sly digs at Razer. And obviously I know you used to work with the guys and kind of helped get that set up. Is that kind of, I mean, you know, a friendly rivalry thing, or do you really feel that, you know, they're the people that you are going to be competing with in a very serious capacity?
Well, you know, he wasn't actually meant to come across as a dig at Razer or any other company, in fact, because I
may not be doing the comments justice. I'll be honest. It was, of course, all good-natured banter, but.
Yeah, well, it's also the fact that, I mean, just not to lose track of it, that the main thing we're trying to do is to engage people who are playing games today and don't realize the advantage that a good gaming mouse and keyboard can do. And there's no doubt that a Razer or a Logitech is a significant jump above, you know, the basic, you know, OEM mouse and keyboard you probably get with your PC. So, or worse still, the laptop sort of scissor keys you have. So, you know, the point I was making was just that we're going about things differently than other companies, and possibly we've applied more engineering, a more engineering approach to these things than some of the other companies in the space have done. But I certainly wouldn't like to criticize or badmouth any other gaming peripherals companies have done, because if those guys didn't exist, it wouldn't legitimize the sort of things we're trying to do. So.
That's very diplomatic. I like that. Sorry, I always throw these tough questions.
That's okay.
I'm known for doing it, so I apologize. But okay, let's move on to the other part of the kind of Vengeance launch, which I think for esports people was perhaps the most exciting, and that was, of course, this massive $10,000 prize thrown into a Call of Duty 4 Cup. We've seen a lot of people sponsor tournaments in the past, but never quite on the same scale. It's the biggest ever online prize pot for that particular game. So what was the thinking about that, and you know, why did you choose COD 4, and, you know, how did it all come about?
Well, actually, a lot of the credit goes to actually Gareth Ogden, who's our European PR head, and Gareth had pointed out to us that as we looked at our the things we were going to do to establish Corsair in the gaming space, you know, even though we're already well known by PC builder enthusiasts, many of whom are gamers, we weren't really known as a gaming company. And you know, rather than do what a lot of companies do and sort of buy press ads and things like that, the best thing we could do was to really sort of put our money where our mouth is and actually get involved with the community. And we realized that setting up a gaming tournament was a great way of launching an FPS mouse and keyboard. So so once we actually rationalized it, it was a pretty obvious thing to do. So you know, I know that I've seen some of the chatter on the forums about, you know, is this a one-off or are we going to continue doing it? Well, you know, I can say now that, you know, I can't make any commitments, but I can say now that we've been very, very excited and impressed by the speed of the take-up on the places on the first tournament, and right now I think there's a very high chance we'll have a follow-up as well.
Okay, well, hopefully, obviously from the cadred.org perspective, I think there's a lot of Counter-Strike Source players that have their fingers crossed for something similar, but I'm sure you're already aware of that fact. The sort of next follow-on question from that would be then, this involvement, this partnership we've got, a lot of people are skeptical naturally in the esports community. For example, people might look at something that me and you might think of as being innovative on one of your products, and they'll label it a gimmick. And the same goes when people come in and they do look to genuinely promote esports and put something back into the esports community. Other people will say marketing. On a serious note, how committed are Corsair sort of putting back into the esports community and kind of developing these ideas so that perhaps it could be in the future not just cups, it could be a whole new range of things, and if so, what kind of plans do you have?
Okay, well, to answer your first question first, I think that as far as commitment goes, the only proof point I can give is Corsair's background. We started off in the memory business, and we've specialized in overclockable high performance memory for people who are tweaking systems to the ultimate degree, most of whom are actually gamers. And we're deeply involved in the PC building sort of enthusiast community, and have for quite a long way, and that's the way we go about it. We're not our products are not mass produced products. We tend to design something to do one job and to do it better than anything else, and hence when we were designing a keyboard, we realized we weren't designing one keyboard but two, because the sort of features that make it great for WoW players sort of get in the way if you're an FPS player, and vice versa. The sort of twitchiness that a mouse has to make it ideal for a Counter-Strike Source player are the things that drive you up the wall if you're trying to play StarCraft 2 or something.
Yeah.
So we, this is all words. Hopefully, in a year's time, when someone digs up this podcast and listens back, they'll see that they'll see some of the activities that we've actually done in the intervening year. But all I can say is that working with our user community is very much part of Corsair's heritage and the way we go about it. And in that way, we're different to some other companies who let's say are more focused on different aspects than gaming, and gaming's a sort of an offshoot for them, or for companies that tend to be a bit smaller and possibly lack the depth of engineering background that we have.
Well, just to wrap it up nicely then, I'll certainly say thanks very much for coming on, and I'm sure I'm going to bump into you again somewhere on the path that we all walk in esports. We always seem to bump into each other, but
it's a small world.
Yeah, some would say too small. Not me and you though. We're true blue. But look, really appreciate you coming on. I'm sure the Vengeance range is going to be a big success. As I said, can't stress enough. Very impressed, and I hope that everyone else that I've been recommending them to are as well, or that could have some bad repercussions for me. And I'm sure the cup's going to go very well as well. So, any final thoughts or anything you'd like to finish on?
No, just thanks a lot for your support, and I wish all the competitors in the Vengeance Cup the best of luck, and look forward to talking to you again on this podcast, maybe.
I'm sure you will. No worries. All right, you take care now.
All right. Cheers, Richard.
The big story.
Okay, as a result of events this week, and I'm sure an article you'll have seen on the front page, I decided to have a look at the top 5 bullshit artists in esports. For legal purposes, I must stress that these opinions are my own. I'm the sole person responsible for saying them. I'm not being prompted to say them by anyone else, so I'm personally liable if you take offence to them. I've also got to stress that it isn't really a top 5, because if it was, I couldn't have left Zanubis, aka Superfly, off it, but I have. So let's just enjoy this list for what it is. A bit of fun, point out some of the people who've really took the piss in the esports scene down the years. Straight in at number 5 is Mark Reeland Trotter, who you'll all know if you've been following the features output on cadred.org this week. This individual first came to my attention when he was going around telling people that not only did he used to work for the Championship Gaming Series, he was instrumental in setting it up. Despite only being a small cog in that particular machine, I don't remember him, and I did some asking around, and nobody else seemed to remember him as well. And when I say I did some asking around, I mean I asked absolutely everybody I could. I asked the press, I asked the TV production company guys, I asked the host of the TV show. Nobody anywhere could remember a Mark Trotter being involved. The mystery was further compounded by when, approaching Mark directly and asking him himself if he could remember anyone that he worked with, he said he couldn't because it was just a small part of his life, despite the fact that this small part of his life was now his calling card and a reason to be talking to everyone about his next big project. That next big project was, of course, an esports TV show, the Holy Grail, what everyone's been talking about for years and years and years, a match of the day style highlight show on a terrestrial channel. Sadly for Mark, despite having set up the CGS pretty much single-handedly, as he'd have us believe, he had absolutely no knowledge of esports whatsoever. In fact, beyond Team Fortress 2, he knew absolutely nothing, even claiming that Team Fortress 2 had more potential than StarCraft 2. If these outlandish claims don't make you realise that he's full of shit, then perhaps his description of the way that he pitched the TV show will, because he didn't go to one TV station and have a meeting with them. No, he managed to get Channel 5, he managed to get the BBC, he managed to get Sky, all in one room and listen to his single pitch. It's an unprecedented move, the kind of thing that Larry David himself couldn't even manufacture if he said, you know what guys, I'm thinking about bringing back Seinfeld. Yet somehow, Mark Reland Trotter, a very average Team Fortress 2 player, had done the unthinkable. Of course, he hadn't, but what was unthinkable was the fact that he'd go public with it, and somehow expect the world to believe him, or rather, the 103 followers he has on his Twitter. In terms of how easy it was to expose this as a pack of lies, well, it was very easy. It didn't require any work at all. However, you've got to give him credit for the sheer scale of the lie he tried to tell. For number 4, I have to take you back to 2008, when a $100,000 LAN was announced for both Call of Duty 4 and Counter-Strike Source. Do you remember Sesquando? You probably don't, and with good reason, because it never fucking happened. It was all absolute bullshit. Sesquando had done nothing but host small Dutch LANs, and then all of a sudden they announced they'd been bought out by some huge company that could now afford to pump money to the tune of $50,000 each into the two biggest FPS titles at that particular time. Yet when it came to validating the details of the buyout, it wasn't actually to be found anywhere, either online, on the company's website, on Sesquando's website. It was just floating around in this vague press release that everyone was having to read. The company behind it all, On Game, had been described as a world leader in digital entertainment with a focus on poker, so it was understandable had they bought Sesquando where the money was coming from. Yet it did turn out that they had themselves been acquired in 2006 by BWIN Interactive Entertainment AG. The next problem came with the venue, and that it was called the Jagslek Trio Studios, deemed as a prestigious LAN event, yet there was no reference to the studios online. In fact, the place didn't even exist. The address that was attached to the place linked to a fucking place called Cloggy Shop. Yes, a Dutch cobbler's. Quite appropriate, really, given the thing was cobblers from start to finish. And although legitimate organisations had their doubts, the carrot being dangled was so big, people actually started to get involved and promote it. It was so much bullshit that Jens Ringdahl, yes, him from Bloody Tex, went and said, I've never heard anything about this event before, and with all respect, I've never seen anyone launch such a big event with a PDF press release with less than 3 months to go and not even have a homepage. That was back when it was up to the American website Gotfrag to be the voice of reason. Who'd have thought it? In the end, it turned out there was no LAN, there was no money, and everyone who supported it was left with egg on their face. You can tell when people have really been fooled because no one wants to talk about it. They're all too embarrassed. And if you try and track down anything for Sesquando now, you're going to find it very hard indeed. But those of us who were there at the time, we still have a good chuckle about it. This probably isn't as big a load of bullshit as some of the things on the list, but it's one I find personally amusing, so I'm going to include it. Now, given that there's probably some shadowy legal implications if I use people's real names in this one, I'm not going to. I'm going to refer to people only through their gamer handles, and that way maybe we circumnavigate any tricky legal action. Not that it bothers me, I've always wanted to go to court anyway, and this seems as good a reason as any. The CSS scene's always been obsessed with millionaires, and anyone who says that they happen to be a millionaire can go pretty far in the scene because people are just willing to believe the lie, so desperate they are to get a handout. Keen to take advantage of this was a part-time waiter, a chap who liked to call himself Madams. Now, this person had a reputation of actually coming up with the goods. He'd paid for people's phone bills, dentist bills, he'd paid for sports cars to turn up to events. There was everything there that suggested that this person actually had money. Where'd the money come from? Well, sources close to the individual said that he'd had a substantial payout for a work-related injury, so that's right, it was all compensation. Or was it? No one's really certain, but that certainly seems to be the most likely outcome at this particular juncture. Even when it was revealed that he was still working as a waiter, people wanted to believe that he was in fact doing it undercover. Whenever Madams himself was approached about it, he would say that he was a secret millionaire, that he wanted to stay working because he enjoyed it and he didn't want anyone to know about his vast fortune in the bank. Almost anyone, because he was quite keen to tell a load of gamers about it. And even when it was revealed that he was still working this menial job, there were people who decided that this was a reliable source of income if they wanted to attend a LAN. The last team to find out the hard way was Sway Gaming, who went to a Belgian LAN called Outpost on Fire back in 2009, with the millionaire's vast fortune backing them. When they did get out there, though, they were in for a bit of a surprise. In fact, there was no hotel booked for them, as they'd been told there were, and when they tried to contact him, he was nowhere to be found. Having to use their own money, Sway Gaming managed to get themselves into a youth hostel, and they were on very basic per diem for food. However, thanks to another guy who perhaps could have made it into this category, a chap called Nordy, who's currently with Reason Gaming, he put up some of his own cash to get them through the tough times. Despite Madams trying to make up an intricate story as to why he hadn't paid for the hotel and why he couldn't support the team and this and that, ultimately he slinked away from esports and hasn't been seen again. You can't dislike this individual, though. The prevailing sense has to be one of pity, or perhaps you just find it all comical. Comical that people would believe him, and comical that he would blow all that money trying to impress a bunch of gamers that he's something that he wasn't. In at number 2 will be one that all you old schoolers will appreciate. It's the self-proclaimed godfather of esports, Angel Munoz. Angel Munoz was, of course, the founder of the CPL, and with their motto, play hard, go pro, their big cash tournaments, and their media exposure, they were an inspiration to everyone around the world who wanted to compete in the esports realm. While initially it was the biggest thing to hit global esports, what did start happening was more and more people were not getting their prize money paid out, and this was something that was laid solely on the doorstep of sponsors and people who had supported the tournaments. The way it would eventually be explained was that the people who had promised to put up the money would then renege on that particular deal, but even though it was the CPL that were benefiting from the sign-ups and benefiting from the exposure, and they'd advertised the tournaments as having set prizes, they had no obligation, apparently, to pay out the missing money. There was always something a bit shadowy about Angel Munoz, and indeed, when Gottfrag decided to interview him in his house, he wouldn't let them take pictures of his mansion. Understandably so, really, when you consider that the man himself always professed to make a meagre living of it. When he was interviewed over at a website called LGN, now defunct, he actually said, "The truth is that I received a low six-figure salary for my work as CEO of the CPL's parent company and did not receive any additional compensation for my work at the CPL. I certainly did not make millions during my 11 years of working at the CPL. Maybe people just don't realise how expensive it was to run the CPL. Our payroll was well over $1 million a year and had prizes, taxes, employee benefits, attorney fees, event production, promotions, operational expenses, etc. We were running at a marginal profit and sometimes at a loss." All fine and dandy, still doesn't explain where the missing prize money is though, and there's some prizes that have yet to be paid that go back to 1999. Indeed, I can think of one organisation off the top of my head that's owed $50,000 alone just from the CPL, and the fact is, they're never going to get it, are they? There'll be some people that remember the fact the Experience event didn't pay out for over 2 years, but if you can imagine not paying out for 12, you're starting to get an idea of just how ridiculous the CPL situation is. No one ever felt comfortable even attempting legal action with a company so big, and it was clear that, with all their investment, the chances are you were going to spend more in legal fees than you were in any prize money you would recoup if you got anything at all. In many ways, Angel Munoz was a very early prototype for the kind of greedy person that would come into esports and effectively use it to feather their own nests with no real sense about growing the collective scene or, increasing the size of the pie so we could all maybe take a slice of it later down the road. Simply put, he was in it for himself and he didn't really care what people thought about him. This is pretty much the blueprint for how tournament organisers, heads of big companies and esports investors generally carry themselves now. So when he says that his legacy will always remain, he's absolutely right. It does, for good and ill. Incredibly, Angel manages to kind of hang around the peripheries of the esports scene and attract significant funding. There's continual rumours about a CPL return backed by Chinese investors, but the truth is we don't really know what's going on. All we do know is there's a massive amount of prize money that's never going to be paid out. And it's the number 1 spot, and guess who it is? Well, it's the whole of the Championship Gaming Series, the biggest load of bullshit to hit esports. Well, how can you say that, Richard? Well, quite simply, I was there, and while they may have paid out the prize money and paid out their salaries, one thing's got to be said. It was absolute grade A bullshit from the start to the rotten finish. Amazingly, there are still people out there who think it was a legitimate talent contest rather than a load of manufactured crap. I imagine those people are the same sorts of idiots that debate the finer points of X Factor. The whole point is, it was completely controlled, right from the start to the finish. There was so much money riding on it, and so much weight attached to the final product. It absolutely had to be. General managers came out and said that they were picking people based on talent, yet I know for a fact that nightly there was meetings held with all the CGS staff where they would talk about who was going to get what players and for what reasons. Much like X Factor, if you had some interesting story or an angle, you were more likely to get picked, as we saw with the Project Gotham Racing driver, Neo Jake, who I wrote the story about him leaving his job and selling his possessions to be able to come and compete, which made him a shoo-in, or having a twin, as we saw in the FIFA department. If that wasn't bad enough, there was all these staged theatrics, and as much as I have respect for Jonas BSL Vikan, who after all is a fellow journalist, what he did with the Fnatic thing and the scrap of paper and the scribbling and the scrunching, it was just absolute nonsense. Because the organisation was pissing money away like it was a remake of Brewster's Millions using only cunts in the cast, Jonas and other managers like him never felt they could really come out publicly and say, look, okay, you got us, it was all a load of stage bullshit. In fact, to this day, people still want to maintain that what they did wasn't a complete act, just in the hope that these people are going to come back and offer them a job. The reality, of course, is there for anyone who wants to watch the programs. If you saw the sob stories that they had in the American run of it, where gamers were talking about how they were bullied and they'd use gaming and self-respect and other such bullshit, it was just absolutely beyond belief. It doesn't end there. Many of you will remember the American CSS player known as Warden. He's quite a big lad, let's be honest about it. Well, during the CGS, anyone who was deemed over a certain weight was basically told to go in the gym and lose the pounds because it didn't look good on the cameras. I've heard this direct from players, although some of the other players want to deny that that ever happened. What I can say is there was a direct mandate given to the managers where it was told, you really need to get your players in the gym, and then how they would phrase that is that it was a training exercise to keep them fit, to improve their concentration, and all of a sudden it was linked back into gaming. The only part of the whole thing that wasn't staged or manufactured or controlled were the games themselves, and certainly you can't take away from the players' achievements when it comes to that. Sadly, the closest we've come to a full confessional about the Championship Gaming Series has been in the form of disgruntled staff writing blogs and finally admitting how the drafts were just a load of bullshit and they were picking teams that they knew and it was all pre-discussed. And it's a shame that we can't have a total disclosure now that it's no longer with us. People often ask why we're still talking about the CGS many, many years later, and it's simply because it was the biggest opportunity, it was the biggest waste of money, it was the most epic fail. Perhaps if they hadn't tried to control it all from the ground up and produce something that had a scripted narrative as much as any drama series, it would have been completely different. But it wasn't. A Championship Gaming Series certainly finishes top in one thing, and that is in the bullshit charts.
The Talking Point.
Okay, well, we said we were going to have him on last week, but we couldn't because he buggered off to Vegas, living the dream with his Microsoft job. But now we have got Stephen Sasquatch Sikos going to come on to the show. And basically, the whole point of this is his expertise in the North American scene. He's somebody who's been around the block, a real veteran, was captain of the legendary Devastation team back in 2005, and he knows the scene inside out. He's even still competing, but in main and kind of in a casual capacity. By the time you listen to this, we're going to have had the North American CSS Top 10 go live on the front page, so we wanted to get him on air just to give us some thoughts about the shifting North American landscape. So I spoke to him earlier, and here it is. Okay, so our resident expert Stephen has got a few things to say about everything that's been going on in the American scene at the moment. I guess the first thing you'll probably want to talk about will be the Team Forbidden situation, which is going to be, perhaps interesting for you to talk about, because I understand that you are kind of an ESCA admin. Is that right? Or
yeah, I mean, I'm an ESCA admin. I handle support tickets also, so it is a little touchy subject.
Okay, so what's your take on it? Because I mean, from where I'm stood, I think Team Forbidden have been done a great injustice.
I mean, I definitely see it as an issue on both sides. I mean, at every LAN I've ever been to, I've never really recorded going drinking. It's kind of like going to Vegas and, tweeting about like sleeping with somebody while you're engaged. It's just something you don't really do, but you got to see from both sides. I mean, Forbidden, it's kind of disheartening. You have a terrible season invite, go back to main, struggle your way back to invite. Luckily, some team, my team dies and they get back in, and then they make the LAN. I mean, it's a heartbreaker because they're honestly doing a lot better than they thought they would be doing at this point in time, and they're kind of just smacked in the face for the extra effort. But on the other hand, I mean, you have ESCA, which is truly the only league running in the United States, like active with like big sponsors. So in their point, they don't really want to lose their sponsorships. When you start branding a drinking games, after a LAN with the big giant title that says like ESCA LAN drinking, it's a bad place to be on both sides.
What do you make of the reaction from some of the higher ups at the ESCA? I mean, I think what people have took the most kind of exception to has been really the response that it got, because it's not exactly been played out as professionally as you would normally associate with ESCA. And not only that, I would say it's been a bit disproportionate because Check 6 have walked free from the whole issue, and ESCA staff one ESCA staff member was involved, and no action's been taken there. So I mean, what do you make of it? I mean, if you can speak candidly about that.
I mean, I personally wouldn't have banned. I think yes, they should have taken down the video as fast as they could. I think that definitely was a good point. However, I mean, the time limit a little extreme at the point in time at night, on Eastern Standard Time was like 3 a.m. However, I think that I kind of agree with the decision in terms of the end result. I don't think he gave him enough time to take down the video. If they obviously disregarded his wishes and just kept the video online, I mean, that's definitely grounds for termination. But you have to think of it this way. It's like almost that will at employer. I mean, I know Europe does a little different. You got to give like 2 months in advance notice when you fire somebody, but I mean, it's the only league in town. I think everybody in that video should have been handed the same punishment across the board. I think it involved, the Check Six members, etc. Really should have felt the same exact punishment, because if you're going to do one in, I think you have to do the entire lot. And I mean, as much as I respect the person in the video who is, a news writer for ESCA and is definitely has a big part of the American scene, if they're going to start banning other team players, I think he should at least be smacked down almost the exact same.
Do you think it'll be overturned maybe at a later date? It seems to be pretty final at the moment. Anyone talking about it on the ESCA forums is locked down pretty quick. Do you think that maybe, if it's left for a period of time, there's going to be some kind of sense reached, and perhaps the 150-day ban for perfectly legal drinking in a hotel room is going to be seen as excessive? Or is this really it? I mean, our team forbidden consigned back to Maine at best?
I mean, it's kind of like an unfair relegation, I mean, the one thing you have to think about is really ESCA's track record of how they decide on things. You're going to be looking at them, a couple seasons going back, season 5, my team in Invite had 2 players who we had no idea how they got on our roster join. And ESCA makes a standard, Invite League can have 4 roster joins during the season. And with one of our players unable to attend a LAN, pretty much crippled our online team and killed it. And it was fine for them to do it. So I don't really think this is going to be overturned. I think this is just one of those, chalk it up to a lesson. This is I guess a correct move in American esports. It's kind of, as much as we think this is going to be, it's a hobby and a game, for some sponsors and some leagues, this is a legitimate sport at one point in time. And you don't really see, for instance, NASCAR drivers going out after they win a race and getting tanked because they lose their sponsors, or, Michael Phelps in general getting caught with pretty much a bong. And that cost him, multiple sponsorships. So the whole idea is that if they want to consider this to be a professional, venue and a professional, sport, it's time to really start treating it that way. And this is the first step, I guess, into the legitimacy of this game. I guess games in general.
Okay, well, we'll move on from that. What I really want to pick your brains about, because obviously we did a little bit of a shoutcasting together during the ESCA, and we didn't really have as much time to sort of talk about it on air as we would have liked. But in terms of the shifting North American scene right now, what's your take at what's happening at the top? A lot of people seem to think Fully Talked, obviously Check Six now, are the best team in North America. They've beaten Dynamic in 2 finals. It wasn't just a fluke at ESCA, if you can call a format victory a fluke. They obviously had done it at CEVO as well. Do you think they are now the number 1 team on your continent?
You can't really, 5 seasons as a body of work, you really can't just throw it away after one loss. Everybody has off games. You see, even in the high-end 1.6 scene, team loses a best of 3 pretty badly, and then the next week comes to another LAN and wins. They're definitely not losing their number 1 spot yet. I believe that the Fully Torque team, if they stay together in their current incarnation, can be a very formidable opponent. Maybe, Complexity and 3D back in the 2005-2006 time of 1.6. This is really going to open up, I think, the scene in North America, where people finally have the confidence to, ride out, try new combinations. Everybody maybe give some people a chance, and I think it's going to be a big move maybe towards the competitive side of Counter-Strike Source in the North American scene.
So you say Dynamic kind of aren't, washed up yet, but they didn't look their usual selves at the LAN, and they actually managed to beat Fully Talked before they played them in the finals. But it wasn't vintage Dynamic. It was a lot closer than they would have liked. And then, they looked even worse again in the finals. In particular, Pex was a player who stood out as not having a great time of it. And, what do you think was wrong at that event?
I don't know. It looks as if, maybe their individual play, maybe their team cohesiveness kind of looked out of whack. I don't think it's they're washed up. I don't think it's the team is having a downswing of, I mean, Tiger Woods in general, watch it, he had that horrible incident, came back and was absolutely terrible during his first couple tournaments. But I mean, it's funny because when you start thinking of a team being so invincible and so good, even when Tiger Woods came back from those tournaments, he was still finishing top 20, top 10, making millions of dollars, and it wasn't as if he was the worst golfer in the world. And that's going to happen here. I think that you don't build a dynasty that wins 5 invite leagues in a row without having the pieces be intact. I mean, watch next tournament, maybe next ESEA event, they win the next one, and then it's almost like we're watching the Patriots. They win a couple Super Bowls in a row, have an off year, still good in most team standards, and they return to excellence. So I think they're still the team to beat.
Do you think they need to change anything? Because, ultimately, like I say, Peck's underperformed. There's perhaps an argument Legend is distracted because obviously his retirement is impending.
I think that, you can't really blame, a good team doesn't blame a member. So I don't think they're really going to point fingers at individuals. I think that everybody on the team has a role. Maybe people didn't perform their role as well as they could. Understatement on a bad tournament to frag like an FPR of under 0.5 means half of the rounds you're not really doing anything. But I think he's a larger role than just that. I think that's a discredit to his fame. No one is going to really consider him the top fragger of the team, so you can't really expect that out of him. So I think they're content with what they have. I'd be really surprised to see them switch him out. Even Legend, I think Legend's a bigger piece than people give him credit to.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that front. Okay, well, let's move away from the top two, because one of the things that, we always seem to be talking about is, these two teams, dynamic, the shift of power. Obviously, Czech Six have bagged themselves arguably the best, certainly the second best on current form in North America. But, to coincide with our top 10 rankings, which is the principal reason for having you on the show. By the time you're listening to this podcast, obviously that's going to be out. We did notice Cyber Revolution were in at 4th, and they've had to decline, or the organisation's had to decline attending ESWC. What can you tell us about that Cyber Revolution team, and should we take them seriously as a competitor?
As in the new Cyber Revolution?
Well, I've got down, right, and again, perhaps this is the incorrect lineup, but I've got your old friend 4Shot, Cheeks, ES, Poz, and Schaefer. How old's that, or is that right?
I guess that would be it.
Yeah.
I could see that team doing pretty good. I think they have some pieces that will make the team to be questioned, to be feared, maybe potentially winning some games in Europe. I don't see them finishing top 3, but I can say them being an upset team. I don't really know how well certain members of the team will do, not having really that LAN experience. The last time my brother and Sam went over to Europe, we didn't fare so well. I think a lot of it had to deal with lack of preparation and a lack of effort, and with the older members on that team having full-time jobs. And the average age of that team is somewhere, even though Sam is 18, and I don't know how old ES is, but my brother being 22, Schaefer like 26, and Trevor like 25.
Schaefer's got to be older than 26, hasn't he, surely?
He's like 26.
I'd have thought he'd have had like our combined age or something.
Yeah.
He's like the granddad.
Lloyd's definitely my age, maybe a little older, but that's, everybody has jobs. It's the issue like right there where I have to, pay for my roof over my head. I can't really give, more than maybe 15, 20 hours a week to this game, and that's going to really hurt them. They're a new team. I could see them being okay individually. They may stand up with the better teams, but I don't think really it's going to be worth sending them over, and that's what I've been telling my brother. But it's really up to them to make their own decision. Because right now, to send anybody from the United States to Paris right now, if we bought tickets today.
Yeah, my understanding is that they again, this is like just incoming news as we're recording this at like 2:30 in the morning GMT. My understanding is that Cyber Revolution won't be sending a team, and that the German side, ESC Gaming, will be getting the spot. It's not been officially confirmed yet, but that's what my inside sources are telling me, which I think that's a shame. I would have liked to have seen Cyber Rev in some incarnation attempt.
Yeah, I think it would have been better to maybe have a third North American team in an event of 12. Maybe an Asian team, who knows? But the fact is that it's expensive to come across that pond, man. Especially with all members. Like we got lucky when we came as Blight, having 4 out of 5 members live within 15 minutes of the Newark airport. Like, I mean, flights were about $600. You hop on the plane, you're good to go, and that's with tax.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, you got to send people from Ohio, somebody from California. I mean, you're talking now, even from New Jersey, $900 to go to Paris. Like, really, in terms of like profit, in terms of like money investment and return on investment for a sponsor, you're looking at like $5,500, $6,000 USD just for flights. I mean, plus your hotel, your food. Even if you finish second, you're pretty much breaking even or losing money. So it's not really a smart fiscal investment. And with the state of this game right now, I don't really know how many more sponsors are going to be hopping on Counter-Strike Source.
Yeah.
I really don't think this is really the place where this is where sponsors want to invest their money. You're talking a community that in the United States fields maybe 300 teams. So we got 1,500 people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then you have some spectators and some kids who pub. But I mean, the fact is that this isn't a really good place to invest. And it's never going to be that way again like it used to be until the 1.6 community and the Source community is big enough truly to start competing against the StarCraft 2 community. People who play Halo, people who play like Call of Duty on the actual console. Those MLG tournaments field more teams at a Halo event 4-on-4 than you'll see at like all of the European 1.6 and Source tournaments combined.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's smart for a company to go invest money in MLG because they're on ESPN. I mean, even SC2 now, you see all these teams in the United States and Europe just throwing big sums of money at players because they're actually going to get media coverage.
Well, again, it's obviously a very important point that you're making, and we might come back to it. But just before you do that, one of the things I did want to say, there was one team that really caught my eye on this top 10, and one I was thinking they should probably be a little bit higher. And I would have loved to have seen these guys go to ESWC, and that was the One-Eyed Zomblers and another kind of Zomblers spin-off. Their lineup of Brawl, Classified, Devour, Heatwave, and Source. Now, that for me right there is a team that I think, well, anyone would want to watch that lineup compete against Europeans, right?
I mean, it's a team of like it's like the good old guys. I mean,
Yeah.
who can you not like those players? I mean, they're all enjoyable people. They're all characters. I mean, honestly, at one point in time, I think Rich Sauce Cannon was possibly the best rifle in all of the entire world. I mean, the talent that kid had is astronomical. The only problem is he's getting old too. I mean, Rich is about a year older than I am. Jesus. I mean, it's I think it's a team that it's funny because you have a team that potentially could be the most, I guess, experienced, possibly the highest skilled individually, and the entire North American scene, and it just seems like they're not getting their pieces together. I mean, last season, not to like down talk anything, but it looks as if Heatwave and Classified, even though they're the two youngest members pretty much on the team, weren't even performing up to their standards from like 5 years ago, let alone like now. I mean, it's just a shame, but I think they're going to be a team next season that finally has figured out how to win again. They have the drive. They practice a lot more than the other teams. They're a lot more skilled. And I think this is really their year to go back to the LAN and make a big splash.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not many big CGS names left, kind of in invite and, knocking on the door. I understand there's a team in Maine that War Machine's at, and I think Mo might still be going and Clown might still be going. But, generally there's a lot of names now, looking at this top 10, that I don't recognize. There's many that I do, but there's a lot now that I don't. And looking at the bottom 5 teams, we've got teams like Just Cause Project and it's 6, and I know nothing about these guys.
I mean, that's a team of players who really have risen fast. I mean, last season they were in this league. It really was kind of a test season. I honestly think in terms of strength of schedule, they had the easiest schedule entering the league of any team. They were able to actually win against C-Red to start the season, Right off the bat, I figured, man, they're putting down a team that's more experienced than them, and like with the team lineup they had with Doobie, etc. I thought, man, these guys are going to easily make playoffs, and then they just tanked. I mean, they got to midway point of the season at like 5-4, with the rest of their season being pretty much a cakewalk, and just threw it away. Games of like 16-11, 16-10s that really could have been wins in their favor. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's a team that some of the players have gone to LAN, have done pretty decent. They're really in their infancy. They're kind of picking up 2 new players in JSD from whatever they're called now, Easy Money, or you want to call them now, Vindicated. And Stan, a player from Canada who's been around the scene. He was actually on my roster before my team folded at the beginning of the season. Both of them can be really good assets, but I really think they're a little too young to really compete with the big giants in the North American scene.
And finally, just to kind of wrap up the summary, obviously the former Czech Six Gaming, they're now under the name Pugstars for the moment. I hear a dog get someone's getting upset. Well,
she doesn't like the Canadians. I don't know.
You've trained her well. But yeah, no, they're playing under the name Pugstars. And I mean, are they looking to attract new sponsorship? I mean, do you think they'll ever get a shot in a big organization again?
I do not think so. I think the team, truthfully, is a 3-13, 4-12 team next season. With Colo leaving, and there's no real strat caller, and the brains from their team, which was Bill Nose, kind of mid-season got removed, and you watch once he got removed, they ended up pretty much almost losing out the rest of their season. They got a free win on Tuscan against my brother's team, 4-on-5, and they still won only 16-9. So I don't think this team has a remote shot at the playoffs. I don't think this team has a remote shot of staying in invite past next season. They're probably going to get relegated back to Maine.
What's Colo going to do? Because, like every time I've watched that team, he's the standout player. Yeah, he's got an ego. Yeah, he gives it. But 9 times out of 10, he's also the guy hitting the shots and is top of the charts. So, surely he's got to be in a big team before long, right?
I think he's the best player from that team. I think he's the most talented. I don't know what he's doing. Like, personally, I've talked to him, and he's entering university this year coming up. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if he really has the time to invest into this game. He's not coming from pretty much out of nowhere about less than a year ago to being maybe a top 10 skill player in North America. The problem is he's really, I don't know what he's going with it. I don't see any team that really is looking to pick up an offer right now. I don't know where he fits. I know he's trying to make his own team with some players possibly from, a Swole Patrol team, but who knows really? I mean, it's really this infancy. Another 2.5 weeks until season 10 starts. Yep. It's going to be a pretty big, shift for some players. You might find some players playing on teams you had no idea they were playing with. So this is actually the most fun part of Counter-Strike. It's kind of like the off-season free agency rush that you got in the NFL this year. 2 weeks of pretty much players just going everywhere. So who knows where he'll end up.
Okay, well, look, it was great to get you on. Always great to get your thoughts. We'll probably get you on again in a couple of weeks, and we'll try and tie it all up as a ESWC stroke kind of, looking at the ESEA season special. We'll definitely pick your brains. But until then, I'll thank you, and no doubt I'll talk to you in the future.
Thanks a lot. Good night.
Coming up next.
So there you have it. That's another podcast down, and perhaps the last, maybe not. I guess we'll have to wait and see how it all pans out. It's perhaps a little too soon to tell you what we're going to have on next week, but one thing I can say is that by the time you hear the next one, Intel Extreme Masters will either have happened or be underway, so certainly you can expect a large part of the content to revolve around that. Events notwithstanding, we'll certainly be bringing you our own irreverent take on the week in esports. Or will we? Is this the last time you hear our wonderful, overly long theme tune? Listen to it well, friends. Listen to it well.
The Catred.org podcast, your weekly guide to the world of esports news. Presented by Richard Lewis.